The subject calendar in your Brightspace subject site takes two forms. One of them is the form that you see on the subject homepage, which is a condensed form showing what's called the mini cal, which is a view of the current month. You can move backwards and forwards in that view, and you'll notice where there are events or assignments happening on particular dates, there'll be dots underneath those particular dates. And then underneath that, you'll also see a breakdown of which events are happening on the dates selected. So for example, if I chose the 10th here, we can see the events that happen on the 10th. If you haven't selected a particular date, then it's not going to identify events at that point. You can, however, choose for it to show you all events that are happening after those particular dates. So from the current date in October, there's no events left in the subject. But if I look back here, I can see on the 18th, for example, we've got a series of assessments happening on these dates, etc. Now this is one view of the calendar that both staff and students see, and it exists within the calendar widget. So it is a small condensed form of the calendar tool that just shows you some of the information, but it is not the full calendar tool. To get to the full calendar tool, we can click on the calendar item here. There's also a link to it underneath My Subject and Calendar, and you'll also find it in your subject admin area underneath Site Resources. They all go to exactly the same place, which is the full calendar tool. Now you'll notice here that it gives a breakdown of different types of activity in the calendar, and you can see the different ways that Brightspace organises those activities. Probably the two main ones for you to look out for are events and assessment items such as quizzes or assignments. And you can filter this list to show those. But effectively, anything that you add a date condition to, so a due date, for example, or an end date or a start date, anything that you add a date condition to in Brightspace will be added to the calendar. So if I was to refine my list here by assignments, it's only going to show me assignments and their due dates. I could uncheck that and go to events, for example, and it will show me, looks like we've got Zoom meetings, for example, happening here. And those are called events in Brightspace. So you can filter your list. You have the ability to change how this views. What we're currently looking at is called the list view. We can change it to a view of a particular month. So if we went back to the previous month, so we can see this is more of a traditional calendar sort of view, and you can open up each of the events from there. A breakdown of week by week, which we can also do. It seems to take a bit longer to load, mind you. Then it's giving you all of the time slots, etc. So you can change that. From my experience, however, either the list view or the agenda view are probably of value to you or to students. The agenda view allows you to refine it to a particular time period. So if I just wanted to see things happening within the next period of time, otherwise list view as a default is pretty handy, just showing you one after the other. So what we're going to look at is how to add events to your calendar. Keeping in mind, as I mentioned before, your assessment items will automatically be added to the calendar, and students will be able to see them on their homepage as well in their calendar view. So let's open up the calendar in this training site. And what I'm going to do here is create an event. So probably a fairly common one would be online tutorials, for example. And if you've added a Zoom meeting, for example, using the online meeting Zoom tool, it also will add those events directly into the calendar automatically. So it is integrated and they can be added by creating a new Zoom meeting. But if we were to create another event, so for example, when we have our intensive school days, for example, Then we can put our description in, noticing that you have access to Brightspace editor, which means you can use things like insert stuff to put in videos or other external content. You can add in quick links to draw people directly to other parts of the subject site. Can be quite handy as well. But then underneath, you get to decide who is going to see this event in their calendar. And you can come back to previously made events or assessments and change who can see the item in their calendar. But by default, it's going to be visible to everyone. Although you can hit the drop down and it will show you every group and section, so cohort, for example, that are part of the subject. So if I wanted this to only be in the calendars of students who are in Bathurst Internal, for example, I can refine it from here. Another way of doing exactly the same thing is you can use the button underneath that says Add Groups and Sections. And at that point, you can see exactly the same list. It'll show you any of the cohorts that are available for you to add to the event. And if you've already created any groups within the subject site, you'll be able to refine the calendar items so it's only visible just to people within those groups, which is quite handy. You also have the option to decide when it's going to be visible. So obviously the dates within the calendar. If it's going to be an all-day event, it's going to start with the time that you created, but you can change that obviously to some point in the future. So if I wanted this to be an event that went from next Monday through to Wednesday, for example, following that, I've now got a 3-day event. We can say that it's going to go all day across those 3 days. And then we have some further options. We can make it a recurring event. So the idea of a weekly online meeting, for example, would be a recurring event. We can also add restrictions. And by restrictions, I'm talking about being able to hide this item until you want it to be visible. So, for example, selecting a certain number of days before the event starts. You also have the option of hiding it after a particular date and choosing when it is actually available. So that might be appealing to you. And then lastly, we have a location area. Now that's just a text field, but if, for example, you wanted to put a hyperlink in there, you could do so. I would stress that if you are going to create Zoom meetings that you want appearing in the calendar for students, that you do utilize the communication online meeting Zoom option to do that, because that integration will create the Zoom meeting and add the item to the calendar. It does both. Once you've finished making your event, potentially putting in a location, maybe it's online, hit create, and it's going to go into the calendar. And in this case, I'd restricted that so that it's only visible to a particular group of students. And if I have a look here on the 14th, in my mini calendar view over here on the right, we can see here that the all-day event has been identified. And clicking on that event in the calendar would actually open up all of the information for that event. I can open it in full if I need to. The other thing that we have available to us in the calendar is the tasks tool. Now this is user facing, which means no one else can see this. It's just you adding your own personal to-do list as such. So if I was going to say, don't forget the milk as a task, it adds it to the list. And the moment I check the box next to it, it's going to disappear from my to-do list. However, with my tasks, I am able to add in due dates, which means they're going to get added to the calendar. So if I said this needs to happen on the 16th, and I can save that. So it now has a date condition for the 16th. I can also add a text note. Not scammed, please. And we now have a note with some detail and a due date against this particular activity, which we added for the 16th. So I'm expecting I had hoped that I would see it in there somewhere. Well, it's not added to the calendar at this point, but it is added in my task list, which means it's going to appear on my work to do list for students. All right, we have the option of printing calendar entries and objects from at the top. You can subscribe to the calendar, although by default notifications will show you assessment item events 2 days before they are due. You're going to get email notifications from those events. Other settings we can affect with the calendar tool: basic setup, the hours that it's showing as core, how long default events are for example. And once you've finished particular tasks, do you want them hidden? And when do you want to get reminders about the tasks that you need to do? So you can save those settings as well. So that's a quick look at the task option within your calendar tool, and also pointing out the difference between your full calendar tool and the calendar widget, which exists on the subject homepage, which just shows you that condensed view. Hope that helps.